Hello everyone, welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today is going to be the last episode in our parallax scrolling effects, and the next tutorial is going to be the final outcome of the series, which we're going to go ahead and create a website with a bunch of parallax scrolling effects. I hope you're going to enjoy it. But for today, I'm going to show you another, or at least the last trick that I saw that one can do using parallax. Um, so as you can see here, when I move my mouse, you'll see how these two, one in the image in the background, and then this finger kind of reacts. So you have these pretty cool parallax effects that you can add to your websites. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start making this. So I'm going to go to kotus.com in frontend and our online code editor. So the first thing you need to know is we're going to use some 3D perspective sort of styles. So for the starter, I'm going to create a container. So this is going to be the master container of our sort of 3D parallax effect that you can see over here. So within that, I'm gonna add another container, which I call image container, and inside it, I'm gonna add my images. So since I already have the images over here, I'm going to copy the two images that I'm using in this tutorial. So I'm gonna go ahead and paste these over here, right? So this is the first image, and then we have a sort of transparent background image so that we can overlay this image on top of this image. So you can use pretty much anything as long as the layers on top of the actual background image has a transparent background, and that comes with the PNG images, right? Uh, so let's go ahead and style this a little bit. So I want my container to the master container to have a width of 100 VW, which is viewport width, and height of 100 VH, which is viewport height. And then I would like to make it overflow hidden, so we don't actually have any scrolling on the page. I can see that I have a border or a margin on the body, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that. So the next thing we need to do is add the styles for the IMG container, right? Which is the container for the actual images that we use in this tutorial, right? So the same thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a width of 100% and height of 100%, and then set the position to be absolute, right? Absolute, yes. Um, so that's the style I want to give to my IMG container. As you can see here. And then for the images, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say img container and then img, which is the image tag we use. And I would make sure that both of these have position absolute, right? Because I want to play with the styles in the 3D space. So as you can see now, the first image is on top of the next image. So now if I take the first image by first, which is the background image, which is this iPad over here. So first child, I can set the maybe width to be 100% and height to be 100% as well, right? So we have something like this. The next thing I want to do is, so as you can see, the height changes. Maybe I don't want to set the height because it changes the proportions. So only the width to be 100%. And the second image seems to be a little bit big. So for this case, I can do nth child and then second, which refers to the second image. I can set the width to be maybe something like 30%. So it ends up over here. And then I would set the bottom to be 0 and then maybe left to be 50%, right? So it somehow ends up on the image. I can go ahead and make the bottom maybe a little bit less, so maybe minus 20 pixel, maybe even more, like 50 pixels. So it kind of or maybe 100, so that it ends up sort of on top of the iPad, right? So now we have our styles ready. Again, we have a master container, and then we have an image container which contains our images. So the next thing I want to do is making sure that my parent container, which is container, has set the perspective style to a big number. So let's say 1000 pixels, right? The next thing I want to do is making sure that these images that I have, which I styled over here, uh, basically behave in the 3D space. And to be able to do that in their parent container, which is img container, I'll set this transform style to preserve 3D, right? Just like that. So now, if for example, I get the second image and use transform translate Z and then some high values, you notice that now, as if like we are looking it through a camera, with adding this 200 pixel, you could see that this image came a little bit forward towards the camera. So if I use a negative value, you'll see that it's gonna go behind the image, since now they are behaving in the 3D space, right? Make it maybe 100. So just to show you for real that there is like a difference in the 3D space, what I can do, take these img container, their parents, which contains this transform style, and I'm going to set transform rotate x, and then maybe something like 45 degrees, right? Now, if I also add another rotation on the y-axis, and maybe 45 degrees as well, you pretty much can see even more. Let's give it even more, but I can also change this. So now you can see that in this space, this one is 200 pixel closer in the z-axis to this one. Let me remove this and talk a little bit about axes in 3D space. So in 3D space, we have three axes, X, Y, and Z. Of course, X-axis is the same as in 2D. Y-axis is also the same as in 2D, but Z-axis is the line that goes through the page, right? So from your eye view in the center towards to the middle of the page, and that is Z-axis, right? So basically, when I use rotate on x-axis, it assumes that, the x-axis is this that I show you here, and it tries to rotate around that in 3D space, right? So if, for example, here on the parent container of the images, I say transform rotate x and then something like 70 degrees, sorry, you'll see that it actually rotated around our x-axis, which is like that, right? Uh, 70 degrees. So if I make it even less, you can see that it actually starts, you can kind of understand how this transformation works, right? Just like that. So this is pretty much how we make sure that our elements are basically behaving in the 3D space by set the parent container to have perspective, a higher perspective, and also the image container, which is the parent of the images, has to have transform style preserve 3D. And now how we're going to build this effect is really we make sure that we change the transform styles on the image container, right? So to show you how we're going to do that, I'm going to go to my JavaScript, and then here I'm going to create a constant container, and then do document.query selector, and then the container. But I also need to have a reference to the img container, right? So now what I can do is I want to react to the mouse event, so mouse movement. The way to do that, I can say container. Let me correct this. It is img container. So now the container dot add event listener, and the event for this is mouse move, right? And the second parameter is a function. I'm going to use ES6 arrow functions, but I also pass the event object as well. So now if I console log e.pageX and e.pagey and bring up the console here so that you can actually see the values of ePageX, and ePageX is the value in the x-axis and ePagey is the value on y-axis. So if I go all the way at the end, you will see that our page x value is of a high value, 910. And if I come down, you will see that now our y value becomes a higher value, right? So we're going to play with these two values. So the way to do that, we want to make sure we define a maximum rotation on x-axis and y-axis, right? So let's define a maximum rotation. So const maximum x rotation, which denotes our maximum rotation on x. Let's put 10 degrees, for example. And I'm going to create the same constant for y with the same amount, 10, right? So now I know that, for example, let's take an example of the x-axis. When the mouse moves, when I'm right here, it means that I'm in the middle of the height of the window, right? So I need to actually define another kind of constant, and I call it window width half is going to be window.inner width divided by 2, right? Just like that. And then I do the same thing for that window height. So I'm going to get the window height. And then also I'm going to choose inner height. So now I have two constants. One has the half of the width of the window in pixels and one half of the height of the window. So for example, if I'm right here, mouse is right here, it's half of the width. And if it's over here, it's half of the height of the window. So now I know that depending on where my mouse is, if it's here is half of the window. If it's here is full sort of width of the window, and if it's here it's on the 0, and the same goes with the height. Now what I can do, I can do this. I can define a sort of a variable which we denote with let in ES6. So let rotation x equals to, and rotation x is the rotation around the x-axis. So we want to, basically we care about the values of the mouse in y-axis, right? So if we want to assign the rotation y, we need to think about the mouse values on the x-axis, right? So basically right now we are talking about rotation x. I'm interested in this value. So if I get e.page y and subtract it with window width half, right? Sorry, since it's a rotation x, right? I would care about window height half, right? And then I get this value, right? And then divide it and normalize it by the window height half, right? Just like that. And that value that I get, I multiply it by my maximum x rotation, right? Just like that. I always bring up the console to see if I have any error. So I do the same thing with the rotation y. So I do this rotation y, which is on the y axis. So I'm interested on the x values and window width half. So I can do window width here, and then I normalize it with window width and then maximum um, y rotation, right? And this obviously needs to be ePage X because I'm interested in the values on the X axis of the mouse move, right? But also I need to make sure that this value doesn't go over the maximum rotation that we define. So I can do like if rotation, let me change this to rotation y. So if rotation x is more than maximum rotation x, then I can set the rotation x to actually be the maximum rotation x because I don't want to go over the maximum rotation x, or actually it's x rotation. So let me correct this, maximum x rotation, and the same here. And obviously, since we are, you know, subtracted it but half of the window, if the mouse is over here, this value will be negative. So I need to also check for the negative. So if, let me just make this more than, and if it's the rotation x is less than maximum x rotation, I would just set that to the minus maximum x rotation. The same goes with the y-axis, so I can do this. So I can do rotation y, maximum y rotation. I make sure that the rotation y is equal to maximum y rotation. And if rotation y is less than maximum y rotation, I want to make sure that the rotation y is actually less than uh, maximum rotation y, right? So just like that. So now the final thing to do, now that we have our rotation x and rotation y values, is to make sure that we set the style of image container dot style dot transform equals to, now we have a rotation y. So I'm going to use the object literals in ES6. So I say rotate x, and then here I add my rotation x, of course with the degree, and then I have rotate y, and I set this to be rotation y, of course in degree, right? Just like that. And then the next thing we want to do is, since we already so now you can see that it actually starts showing the effect, right? If I go down, the mouse goes, the rotation goes like that on y-axis. So this is on y-axis. And if I do this, the rotation is on the x-axis, right? So sorry, this is the x-axis, the rotation on the x-axis when I move my mouse on y-axis, and then the other way around. But now you can see that we see a little bit of the border over here. What we can do to solve this is making sure that this image container has a bigger width and height than its parent. So if I say 120% and then set the height as well to be 120%, but I also need to center this. And since it's position absolute, I can set the top to be 50% and then left to be 50% and use transform, translate minus 50% and minus 50%, right? Just like that. But since we have now defined an initial transform property, we also need to add it in our JavaScript when we are rotating it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add this at the end. So now, if I open it a little bit higher and close this, you can see that now we actually has the effect that we are expecting to have. And now we don't see any border. But by the way, I can see that if I go down, I can see a little bit border. So I can change these maximum rotation values to something less, right? So now if I move up and down, you can see that I don't see the white border, right? So yeah, just to go ahead a little bit and talk a little bit more on what happened here. So what we have, we defined a maximum X rotation and maximum Y rotation for when we want to start rotating the image container, which is the parent of, the images that we have over here, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we are interested on mouse move event. And mouse move event has two properties that we are interested in, page X and page Y. Page X talks about how much mouse is, where the mouse is on the x-axis, 2D x-axis in the page, and then page Y is talking about where the mouse is on the y-axis. And then we take use of these values and we subtract the page Y by half of the height, right? And then divide it by window height half so that we get a really small value, and then multiply it by maximum X rotation that we define. You might ask a question, we have E page Y, but why are we talking about maximum X rotation? The thing is that rotation in 3D space, when we say X rotation, it's around the X-axis, and X-axis is from here to this direction, right? This is Y-axis, and this is X-axis, and rotation in 3D space is around that, right? That's why when we are moving the mouse on the X-axis like this, we are interested in the rotation uh, on the Y-axis, right? Because now when I'm doing this, we are actually rotating our parent image container in the y-axis. And then the same goes with the E page Y. So if we go up and down, we are interested in rotating around the x-axis, right? And then we obviously make sure that we don't go over the maximum values that we have defined, and then we basically set the transform style on the image container. So this is one of the cool effects that you can see in many websites. So for example, one of the websites I noticed is called hellomonday.com. So if you look at this website, you can see that it kind of has the same effect. You can see that the elements in this page move on a different pace. So you can see, for example, this one is very obvious. You have this kind of tablet, and then the finger actually moves on a different speed or different, it translates on a different pace as the background, image here. And it's the same effect that we have developed over here, right? The difference is that we took advantage of the rotation, but also we can basically, instead of rotation, we can actually translate this image, for example, in X or Y axis based on kind of the same proportions of the values that we have over here, right? All right, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do. If you had any questions, by the way, please don't hesitate to put them in the comment section so that I can answer you. And sometimes if the question is like really bothering you, I try to kind of solve the problem by doing it in a prototype and sending a link. So don't hesitate to put any comments or concerns in the comment section. And thank you very much again for your support. I wish you a good day and night, and see you next time. Goodbye.